Beneath the scent of lilies, the stench of betrayal lingered. I sat in the front row, my hands folded in my lap, watching strangers file past Christopher's casket with their practiced expressions of sympathy. Behind me I could hear my children, Zachary, 31, and Felicity, 28, whispering with their spouses about arrangements and transitions and what Mom needs now. What I needed was for my husband of 32 years to stop being dead. What I needed was for the man who built Henderson and Associates construction with me, brick by brick, contract by contract, to walk through those funeral home doors and tell me this was all some elaborate joke. What I needed was impossible. Mom. Zachary's voice was low and respectful, in that performative way he'd perfected since becoming a father himself. We should talk about the company. I turned to look at my son, tall like his father but soft where Christopher had been steel. His suit was expensive, bought with money from the job I'd gotten him at our firm, managing accounts he barely understood. Not today, Zachary. I know, but Dad would want. Your father would want you to let his body get cold before you started dividing up his legacy. My voice cut through the hushed atmosphere of the viewing room. Several mourners turned to look, and Zachary's face flushed red. Felicity approached from the other side, her designer heels clicking on the polished floor. She'd inherited my height but none of my backbone, preferring to manipulate rather than confront. Zachary's right, Mom. We need to think practically. The business can't run itself. I stood up, smoothing down my black dress, the same one I'd worn to Christopher's father's funeral 15 years ago. Back then we were still building our empire. Back then, my children still looked at me with something resembling respect. The business has been running just fine with me at the helm for the past 5 years, I said, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. Your father stepped back when his heart started giving him trouble. I've been the operational head of Henderson and Associates since 2019. But Mom, Felicity's voice took on that patronizing tone she used with her own children. You're under so much stress. Grief can cloud judgment. Maybe it's time to let the next generation. The next generation, I repeated the word slowly, tasting the bitterness. You mean the generation that's never worked a construction site, never negotiated $1 million contract, never spent 18-hour days making sure payroll was met and workers got home safe? Zachary stepped closer, and I could smell his cologne. Expensive, imported, purchased with money from a company he'd never truly contributed to. We're not saying you can't be involved. We're saying you shouldn't have to carry the burden alone. Burden. As if the company Christopher and I built from nothing, the company that paid for their college educations, their weddings, their down payments, was something to be endured rather than treasured. The funeral director appeared at my elbow, a thin man with practiced solemnity. Mrs. Henderson, we're ready for the family viewing if you'd like a private moment. I nodded, grateful for the interruption. But as we walked toward the casket, I caught the look that passed between my children. Conspiratorial, determined. They thought grief had made me weak. They thought sorrow had made me vulnerable. They had no idea how wrong they were. Christopher looked peaceful in his navy suit, the one he'd worn to our business awards dinner just 2 years ago. His hands were folded over his chest, and I could see the calluses that 40 years of construction work had left behind, even after he'd transitioned to the office full-time. Those hands had built our first house, had signed our first contract, had held mine during every crisis and celebration we'd faced together. Dad always said the business should stay in the family, Zachary said quietly, standing beside me. He'd want us to carry on his vision. I reached out and touched Christopher's hand. Cold now but still familiar. Your father's vision was excellence, quality, integrity. Those aren't inherited traits, Zachary. They're earned. Felicity moved to my other side, her perfume mixing with the funeral flowers. We know how much the company means to you, Mom. But running it alone, at your age, with everything you're dealing with. At my age, 53 years old, with more energy and business acumen than both of my children combined. And they were talking about me like I was tottering toward senility. I turned away from the casket, away from my dead husband who couldn't defend me anymore, and looked at the two people I'd brought into this world. I built that company. Not inherited it, not married into it. Built it. Every client relationship, every reputation we have in this industry, every dollar of revenue we generate exists because of decisions I made and work I did. We know that, Zachary said. But his tone suggested he was humoring me. That's why we want to honor your contribution by taking some of the pressure off. By removing me from the equation entirely. The words came out sharper than I'd intended, echoing in the quiet room. Felicity's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold in her eyes. That's not what we're saying. But it was exactly what they were saying. I could see it in their posture, hear it in their careful words, feel it in the way they'd been treating me since Christopher's diagnosis 6 months ago, like a problem to be managed rather than a person to be respected. The funeral director cleared his throat. I'm sorry to interrupt, but we need to prepare for the service. I took one last look at my husband, memorizing the face that had smiled at me across boardroom tables and breakfast tables for 3 decades. Then I walked out of that room, my children trailing behind me, already planning my professional funeral. They thought they were being subtle. They thought grief had dulled my instincts. But I'd been watching them circle like sharks since the day Christopher entered hospice care, and I knew exactly what they were planning. What they didn't know was that Christopher and I had been planning too. The service was beautiful. The church was packed with contractors, clients, employees, people whose lives had been touched by the company we'd built. Person after person spoke about Christopher's integrity, his vision, his partnership with me in creating something lasting and meaningful. But all I could think about was the conversation I'd overheard between Zachary and Felicity in the parking lot that morning, when they thought I was still in the bathroom. She'll fight us, Felicity had said. Not if we handle it right, Zachary had replied. She's emotional, vulnerable. We present it as taking care of her, honoring Dad's memory by preserving his legacy. And if she refuses, then we remind her that she's not getting any younger and running a construction company is a young person's game. A young person's game. As if experience and wisdom were liabilities rather than assets. As I watched them playing the part of grieving children, accepting condolences and speaking in hushed, respectful tones about their father's legacy, I felt something crystallize inside me. Not grief. I'd felt that already, pure and overwhelming in the private moments when no one was watching. This was something harder, colder. This was resolve. They wanted Henderson and Associates construction. They thought they deserved it simply by virtue of their DNA. They believed that love and family obligation would override business sense and legal reality. They were about to learn how wrong they were. After the burial, after the reception, after the last mourner had gone home, I sat alone in the house Christopher and I had shared for 28 years. The silence was deafening, broken only by the tick of the grandfather clock he'd bought me for our anniversary. On the coffee table sat a manila folder, one of many Christopher had prepared during his final months, when he'd had the clarity to see what I was only beginning to understand. Inside were documents, contracts, contingency plans. The foundation of what would either save our legacy or destroy our family. I opened the folder and began to read. My husband's careful handwriting covering pages of instructions, strategies, and safeguards. By the time I finished, dawn was breaking through the living room windows, and I understood exactly what I needed to do. My children thought they were inheriting a business. Instead, they were about to learn the difference between ownership and control. Between family loyalty and naive trust. The war they'd started at their father's funeral was about to become very real, and very final. Monday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October air that used to energize me. Christopher and I would have been reviewing the quarterly reports over coffee, planning winter projects, discussing which contracts to pursue in the spring. Instead, I sat alone at my kitchen table, watching my children's cars pull into the driveway at precisely 8 a.m. They'd coordinated their arrival, probably texted each other to make sure they presented a united front. How thoughtful of them. I didn't get up when they knocked. I didn't rush to answer when they used their keys. Keys I'd given them years ago for emergencies, not interventions. I simply sat there, sipping my coffee, listening to their footsteps echo through the house Christopher and I had filled with 30 years of memories. "Mom!" Felicity's voice carried that artificial brightness she used when she wanted something. "We brought breakfast." Course they did. Nothing said, "We're taking over your life," quite like unsolicited pastries. They found me in the kitchen, Zachary carrying a box of donuts from the expensive place downtown, Felicity holding a tray of coffee that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. Both of them dressed for business. His suit freshly pressed, her outfit carefully chosen to project competence and compassion in equal measure. "You're up early," Zachary said, settling into Christopher's chair without invitation. "I've been up early every day for 30 years, I replied. "Business doesn't stop because one of the owners dies." Felicity winced at my bluntness, but I was past caring about their delicate sensibilities. "We know you're grieving, Mom. That's actually why we wanted to talk." She placed a cup of coffee in front of me, some complicated order with oat milk and vanilla that bore no resemblance to the black coffee I'd been drinking since before she was born. Everything about this visit was calculated to demonstrate how little they actually knew about me. Zachary opened his laptop, the screen reflecting off the kitchen table's polished surface. "We've been thinking about Dad's wishes. About what he would have wanted for the company." "Your father's wishes are very clear," I said. "He and I discussed them extensively before he died." "Right, but discussions and legal documents are different things," Felicity interjected. "We've been reviewing the corporate structure, and there are some complexities." "Complexities?" I almost smiled. They had no idea. Zachary turned his laptop toward me, revealing a spreadsheet that probably took him hours to create. "See, Mom, the way the company is currently structured puts an enormous burden on you as the sole operational owner. Dad held 49%, you held 51%. But now that his shares have passed to us." "Have they?" I interrupted. The question hung in the air like smoke. Zachary's confident expression flickered, and Felicity's carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the flush creeping up her neck. "Well, legally speaking, inheritance law dictates," Zachary began. "Inheritance law dictates nothing when specific provisions exist. To the contrary." I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked the garden Christopher had planted for our 20th anniversary. The roses were dying now, brown edges on red petals, but they'd been beautiful in the summer. "Your father was a meticulous man. Every contract, every agreement, every legal document was reviewed by 3 different attorneys." Felicity's laugh sounded forced. "Mom, you're overthinking this. We're family. We're not trying to take anything from you. We're trying to help you preserve Dad's legacy." I turned back to face them, these 2 people who shared my DNA but none of my values. "And how exactly do you propose to preserve a legacy in an industry you've never worked in?" "We'll learn," Zachary said. "We'll hire consultants, bring in experts. You'll run it into the ground within 2 years." The words came out flat, factual. Henderson and Associates Construction has thrived for 4 decades because every decision was made by people who understood the industry, who had relationships with suppliers, who knew which subcontractors delivered quality work and which ones cut corners. "That's why we want you involved," Felicity said quickly. "As a consultant, an advisor, as a figurehead." I sat back down, meeting each of their gazes in turn. "You want the Henderson name for credibility while you make the real decisions. You want my reputation to cover for your inexperience." Zachary's facade cracked slightly. "That's not fair. We're trying to honor what you and Dad built." "Honor?" I tasted the word. Found it bitter. "You want to honor what we built by removing the builder from the equation." The kitchen fell silent, except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of traffic on the street where I'd lived since before they were born. These children, who I'd watched take their first steps in this house, were sitting at my table planning my professional execution. Felicity leaned forward, her voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to despise. "Mom, you're 53 years old. You've worked incredibly hard your entire adult life. Don't you want to enjoy your retirement? Travel, pursue hobbies, spend time with your grandchildren?" Retirement. As if I were some factory worker punching a time clock rather than the architect of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I am 53 years old, I agreed. Which means I have 15, maybe 20 years of peak productivity ahead of me. Your father was 58 when he had his first heart attack. And even then, he didn't retire. He transitioned to advisory roles while I took operational control. Zachary's laptop chimed with an incoming email, and I caught a glimpse of the sender. Bradley and Associates Legal Services. They'd already contacted attorneys. They'd already begun the process of removing me from my own company. The realization should have hurt. It should have felt like betrayal, like a knife in the back from people I'd loved unconditionally. Instead, it felt like clarity, like the moment in a business negotiation when you finally understand exactly what the other party really wants. You've already filed papers, I said. It wasn't a question. Felicity's face went pale. Mom, it's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. I stood up again, this time moving to the kitchen counter where I'd left Christopher's manila folder. You've contacted lawyers about transferring operational control of Henderson and Associates. You've probably prepared mental competency arguments, emotional distress claims, anything that might convince a judge that grief has compromised my judgment. Zachary closed his laptop with a sharp snap. You're being paranoid. I'm being realistic. I opened the folder, pulling out the first document, a copy of the corporate charter Christopher and I had revised just 18 months ago. Tell me, Zachary, in all your research into the company structure, did you happen to notice the succession clause? His silence was answer enough. I placed the document on the table between us, pointing to a paragraph highlighted in yellow. Section 12b. In the event of the death or incapacitation of either founding partner, operational control of Henderson and Associates Construction shall transfer to the surviving partner with full authority to restructure ownership, modify board composition, and execute any and all business decisions without consultation or consent from other shareholders. Felicity's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as she set it down with shaking hands. That can't be legal. It's not only legal, it's ironclad. 3 attorneys reviewed it, including the one you just emailed. I pulled out another document. Your father's will is equally clear. His 49% doesn't transfer to you automatically. It transfers to a trust, with me as the sole trustee, with distribution contingent on my assessment of your readiness to handle such responsibility. The color drained from Zachary's face. You can't do this. I can do exactly this. Your father and I spent months preparing these documents because we knew this day would come. We hoped we were wrong about your motivations, but we prepared for the possibility that we weren't. Felicity stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the kitchen floor. This is insane. We're your children. We're trying to help you. You're trying to help yourselves. I closed the folder, the sound sharp in the quiet kitchen. You've been planning this since your father's diagnosis. You thought grief would make me compliant, that maternal love would override business sense. Zachary's mask finally slipped completely, revealing the entitled rage I'd glimpsed in flashes over the years. You can't run that company forever. You're not getting any younger, and the construction industry is brutal. What happens when you have a heart attack? When you can't handle the stress anymore? Then I'll make decisions about succession based on competence, rather than genetics. I walked to the back door and opened it wide. The October air rushed in, cold and clean. This conversation is over. Mom, please, Felicity's voice cracked. But I detected calculation rather than genuine emotion. You have 2 choices, I said, not turning around. You can continue working for Henderson and Associates as employees, following my direction and earning your positions through merit, or you can find other employment and pursue your own paths. You're making a mistake, Zachary said, his voice tight with anger. Family businesses that don't transition to the next generation fail. You'll destroy everything Dad worked for. I finally turned back to face them, these strangers who wore my children's faces. Your father worked for excellence, integrity, and legacy, not entitlement. They left without another word, Zachary slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows. I watched their cars disappear down the street, then sat back down at the kitchen table with Christopher's folder. There were more documents to review, more preparations to make. Because what my children didn't understand, what they were about to learn the hard way, was that their little coup attempt wasn't the end of this story. It was just the beginning. The call came at 6:30 a.m. on Wednesday, exactly 48 hours after I'd ejected my children from my kitchen. I was already dressed and reviewing project schedules when my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Mrs. Henderson, this is David Foran from Pinnacle Development Group. I apologize for calling so early, but I wanted to reach you before the business day began. I sat down my coffee, my attention sharpening. Pinnacle Development was one of the largest construction firms on the West Coast, known for aggressive acquisition strategies and corporate restructuring. Mr. Foran, what can I do for you? Actually, I'm calling about what we can do for you. I understand you may be interested in selling Henderson and Associates Construction. The words hit me like ice water. I walked to my home office window, looking out at the street where nothing had changed. Same houses, same trees, same normalcy, while my world shifted beneath my feet. I'm not interested in selling, I said carefully. Oh, his surprise sounded genuine. I was contacted yesterday by Zachary Henderson. He indicated that the family was ready to move forward with a sale, that you were all in agreement about transitioning the business to new ownership. My son had called buyers. Less than 2 days after our confrontation, he'd contacted acquisition firms and presented himself as authorized to negotiate the sale of my company. Mr. Foran, I need to be very clear about something. I am the majority owner and operational controller of Henderson and Associates. Any discussion of sale would need to go through me directly. I see. Zachary mentioned that there might be some emotional complications, given your recent loss. He suggested that grief might be affecting your business judgment. Emotional complications. My own son was telling potential buyers that I was mentally unstable. My business judgment is perfectly intact, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. If you're interested in Henderson and Associates, you'll need to work directly with me. Of course, Mrs. Henderson. Perhaps we could schedule a meeting. I'm actually flying in tomorrow to tour your facilities. Zachary arranged. Cancel that tour, I interrupted. If you want to see our facilities, you'll schedule through me. After I hung up, I sat in Christopher's chair and stared at the phone. 3 more calls came within the hour. Steinberg and Associates Morrison Construction Group, and a private equity firm I'd never heard of. All had been contacted by Zachary. All had been told that the Henderson family was ready to sell. My son was shopping my company like a used car, using my husband's death as a selling point to explain why the transition was urgent. I opened my laptop and began making calls of my own. By noon I had a complete picture. Zachary and Felicity had spent Monday evening contacting every major acquisition firm within a 300-mile radius. They'd presented themselves as grieving children, forced to make difficult decisions about their family business because their mother was overwhelmed by grief and unable to handle the operational demands. They'd scheduled property tours, arranged financial reviews, and even provided preliminary revenue projections, all without my knowledge or consent. But the most interesting call came from Patricia Valdez at Coastal Construction Management. She'd known Christopher for 15 years, had worked with us on several major projects. Audrey, I have to tell you something, Patricia said. Zachary contacted us yesterday about acquiring Henderson and Associates, but the numbers he provided don't match our records from your recent projects. I pulled up our actual financial statements on my computer. What numbers did he give you? He claimed the company was hemorrhaging money, that you'd been making poor decisions since Christopher's illness. He showed revenue projections that were about 60% of what we know you actually generated last quarter. My son wasn't just trying to sell my company. He was devaluing it, painting me as incompetent to justify a below-market sale price. Patricia, I need a favor, I said. Can you document exactly what Zachary told you? Dates, times, specific claims about financial performance. Already done. Audrey, what's happening over there? What was happening was corporate warfare, fought by children who thought they could outmaneuver someone who'd been navigating business battles since before they could walk. That afternoon, I drove to the Henderson and Associates offices for the first time since Christopher's funeral. The building looked the same. Red brick facade, clean windows, the sign Christopher and I had commissioned in 1987 when we'd finally outgrown our garage office. But inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Jennifer, our office manager for 12 years, rushed to greet me at the reception desk. "Mrs. Henderson, thank God you're here. We've been getting calls all morning from potential buyers. Zachary told everyone you were selling the company." "Zachary was misinformed," I said. "Please schedule an all-staff meeting for 4 p.m. today." The conference room filled quickly. Project managers, administrative staff, field supervisors who'd driven in from job sites. These were people who'd built their careers with Henderson and Associates, who'd trusted Christopher and me to provide stable employment and growth opportunities. They looked worried, uncertain. In the construction industry, acquisitions usually meant layoffs. I called this meeting to address rumors about the sale of Henderson and Associates. I began. "Let me be absolutely clear. This company is not for sale. It will not be sold. Any communications suggesting otherwise are unauthorized and inaccurate." The relief in the room was palpable, but Tom Martinez, our head project manager, raised his hand. "Mrs. Henderson, Zachary told us that you were planning to retire, that the family had decided to sell rather than try to maintain operations." "Zachary spoke without authority," I said. "I am 53 years old, in excellent health, and have no intention of retiring. Henderson and Associates will continue to operate exactly as it has, with the same commitment to quality and integrity that Christopher and I established." Felicity walked into the conference room at that moment, her face flushed and her professional composure cracking. She'd obviously rushed over from her own job when she heard about the meeting. "Mom, we need to talk privately," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "We're having a staff meeting," I replied. "If you have business concerns, you can address them through proper channels. This is ridiculous. You're making decisions based on emotion. I'm making decisions based on 30 years of business experience and legal ownership." I stood up, my voice carrying across the conference room. "Since you're here, Felicity, perhaps you can explain to our employees why you and your brother have been contacting potential buyers without my knowledge or consent." The room went silent. Felicity's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, defiance, before settling on cold calculation. "We were exploring options," she said carefully. "Given the stress you're under, we thought it might be helpful to understand what alternatives exist." "Alternatives to what?" "To you running this company alone while you're grieving." I walked around the conference table, stopping directly in front of my daughter, the woman who'd sat in the same room as a teenager, listening to Christopher and me discuss business strategies, learning about integrity and leadership by example. "I am not running this company alone," I said. "I'm running it with the same team of professionals who've made it successful for decades, the same people who've built their careers here, who've trusted us to provide stable employment and growth opportunities." "What numbers did he give you?" "He claimed the company was hemorrhaging money, that you'd been making poor decisions since Christopher's illness. He showed revenue projections that were about 60% of what we know you actually generated last quarter. My son wasn't just trying to sell my company. He was devaluing it, painting me as incompetent to justify a below-market sale price." "Patricia, I need a favor," I said. "Can you document exactly what Zachary told you? Dates, times, specific claims about financial performance." "Already done. Audrey, what's happening over there?" What was happening was corporate warfare, fought by children who thought they could outmaneuver someone who'd been navigating business battles since before they could walk. That afternoon, I drove to the Henderson and Associates offices for the first time since Christopher's funeral. The building looked the same. Red brick facade, clean windows, the sign Christopher and I had commissioned in 1987 when we'd finally outgrown our garage office. But inside, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Jennifer, our office manager for 12 years, rushed to greet me at the reception desk. "Mrs. Henderson, thank God you're here. We've been getting calls all morning from potential buyers. Zachary told everyone you were selling the company." "Zachary was misinformed," I said. "Please schedule an all-staff meeting for 4 p.m. today." The conference room filled quickly. Project managers, administrative staff, field supervisors who'd driven in from job sites. These were people who'd built their careers with Henderson and Associates, who'd trusted Christopher and me to provide stable employment and growth opportunities. They looked worried, uncertain. In the construction industry, acquisitions usually meant layoffs. I called this meeting to address rumors about the sale of Henderson and Associates. I began. "Let me be absolutely clear. This company is not for sale. It will not be sold. Any communications suggesting otherwise are unauthorized and inaccurate." The relief in the room was palpable, but Tom Martinez, our head project manager, raised his hand. "Mrs. Henderson, Zachary told us that you were planning to retire, that the family had decided to sell rather than try to maintain operations." "Zachary spoke without authority," I said. "I am 53 years old, in excellent health, and have no intention of retiring. Henderson and Associates will continue to operate exactly as it has, with the same commitment to quality and integrity that Christopher and I established." Felicity walked into the conference room at that moment, her face flushed and her professional composure cracking. She'd obviously rushed over from her own job when she heard about the meeting. "Mom, we need to talk privately," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "We're having a staff meeting," I replied. "If you have business concerns, you can address them through proper channels." "This is ridiculous. You're making decisions based on emotion. I'm making decisions based on 30 years of business experience and legal ownership." I stood up, my voice carrying across the conference room. "Since you're here, Felicity, perhaps you can explain to our employees why you and your brother have been contacting potential buyers without my knowledge or consent." The room went silent. Felicity's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, defiance, before settling on cold calculation. "We were exploring options," she said carefully. "Given the stress you're under, we thought it might be helpful to understand what alternatives exist." "Alternatives to what?" "To you running this company alone while you're grieving." I walked around the conference table, stopping directly in front of my daughter, the woman who'd sat in the same room as a teenager, listening to Christopher and me discuss business strategies, learning about integrity and leadership by example. "I am not running this company alone," I said. "I'm running it with the same team of professionals who've made it successful for decades, the same people who've built their careers here, who've trusted us to provide stable employment and growth opportunities." They looked worried, uncertain. In the construction industry, acquisitions usually meant layoffs. I called this meeting to address rumors about the sale of Henderson and Associates. I began. "Let me be absolutely clear. This company is not for sale. It will not be sold. Any communications suggesting otherwise are unauthorized and inaccurate." The relief in the room was palpable, but Tom Martinez, our head project manager, raised his hand. "Mrs. Henderson, Zachary told us that you were planning to retire, that the family had decided to sell rather than try to maintain operations." "Zachary spoke without authority," I said. "I am 53 years old, in excellent health, and have no intention of retiring. Henderson and Associates will continue to operate exactly as it has, with the same commitment to quality and integrity that Christopher and I established." Felicity walked into the conference room at that moment, her face flushed and her professional composure cracking. She'd obviously rushed over from her own job when she heard about the meeting. "Mom, we need to talk privately," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "We're having a staff meeting," I replied. "If you have business concerns, you can address them through proper channels." "This is ridiculous. You're making decisions based on emotion. I'm making decisions based on 30 years of business experience and legal ownership." I stood up, my voice carrying across the conference room. Since you're here, Felicity, perhaps you can explain to our employees why you and your brother have been contacting potential buyers without my knowledge or consent. The room went silent. Felicity's face cycled through several emotions: surprise, embarrassment, defiance, before settling on cold calculation. We were exploring options, she said carefully. Given the stress you're under, we thought it might be helpful to understand what alternatives exist. Alternatives to what? To you running this company alone while you're grieving. I walked around the conference table, stopping directly in front of my daughter, the woman who'd sat in the same room as a teenager, listening to Christopher and me discuss business strategies, learning about integrity and leadership by example. I am not running this company alone, I said. I'm running it with the same team of professionals who've made it successful for decades, the same people who've built their careers here, who've trusted us to provide stable employment and growth opportunities. I turned to address the room. Which brings me to an important announcement. Effective immediately, Henderson and Associates will be implementing an employee stock ownership program. Long-term employees will have the opportunity to acquire equity stakes in the company. The gasps were audible. Tom Martinez looked stunned. Jennifer's eyes went wide. Felicity's voice cut through the murmur of surprised conversation. You can't do that. I can do exactly that. As majority owner, I have the authority to restructure ownership as I see fit. I pulled out another document from Christopher's folder, one I'd spent the morning reviewing with our corporate attorney. This program will ensure that Henderson and Associates remains committed to the people who've made it successful, rather than being sold to the highest bidder. Mom, this is insane. This meeting is for employees only, I said. Since you've chosen not to work for Henderson and Associates in any meaningful capacity, you're not qualified to participate in discussions about company policy. Felicity's face went white with rage, but she couldn't argue with the logic. She'd taken a job at a marketing firm immediately after college, visiting our offices only for family events and the occasional favor. After she left, slamming the conference room door behind her, I turned back to my employees, my partners in building something meaningful. I know this has been a difficult time, I said. Christopher's death was a loss for all of us. But Henderson and Associates was built to last, and it will continue to thrive. Anyone who wants to be part of that future is welcome. Anyone who doesn't is free to find opportunities elsewhere. As the meeting dispersed, I could see the relief and excitement on faces throughout the room. These people had been terrified of losing their jobs to some corporate acquisition. Instead, they were being offered ownership stakes in their own workplace. But as I gathered my papers and prepared to leave, I knew this was far from over. Zachary and Felicity had revealed their true nature, and they wouldn't simply accept defeat. They'd escalate, probably through legal channels, possibly through public pressure. What they didn't understand was that I'd been preparing for escalation since the day I'd found Christopher's folder. Every document, every contingency plan, every legal safeguard had been designed for exactly this scenario. My children had declared war on me, using tactics they'd learned from watching me negotiate with contractors and clients for 30 years. Now they were about to discover what happens when students try to outmaneuver their teacher. The lawsuit arrived on Friday morning, delivered by a courier who apologized profusely as he handed me the thick manila envelope. I signed for it at my front door, still wearing my robe, coffee in hand, watching the autumn leaves drift across the lawn Christopher had maintained with such pride. Henderson versus Henderson, read the court filing. Petition for mental competency evaluation and emergency conservatorship. I sat at my kitchen table and read through 37 pages of legal accusations, crafted by my own children. They claimed I was suffering from acute grief-induced psychological distress that had rendered me incapable of making sound business decisions. They cited my irrational hostility toward family members and my erratic restructuring of company ownership as evidence of declining mental capacity. They wanted a judge to declare me mentally incompetent and grant them emergency control of Henderson and Associates construction. I poured myself another cup of coffee and called my attorney. "Audrey, I've been expecting this," said Penelope Hartman, the woman who'd helped Christopher and me navigate every major business decision for 15 years. "We prepared for this exact scenario. Can they win?" "Not a chance in hell. But they can tie you up in court for months, generate negative publicity, and create enough uncertainty to damage the business, which is probably their real goal." By Monday morning, the story had leaked to the construction industry trade publications. Henderson and Associates owner faces competency challenge ran in Tuesday's Construction Weekly, complete with quotes from unnamed sources claiming I'd been acting erratically since my husband's death. Wednesday brought a reporter to my office, a young woman with ambitious eyes and a digital recorder. "Mrs. Henderson, your children claim you've been making impulsive decisions that could jeopardize the family business. How do you respond to allegations that grief has affected your judgment?" I looked at her across my desk. This stranger had driven to my office to ask about my mental health, based on the word of two people who'd never contributed a meaningful day's work to the company they were now trying to destroy. My response is that Henderson and Associates has completed every project on time and under budget for 6 consecutive quarters, I said. "Our client satisfaction scores are at an all-time high. Our safety record is exemplary, and our employee retention rate is 93%. If that's the result of impaired judgment, perhaps more business leaders should experience similar impairment." The reporter scribbled notes. "But the employee stock ownership program, your children characterize it as a desperate attempt to prevent them from inheriting their father's legacy." "My children have no inheritance to protect," I said calmly. "They've never worked in construction, never managed a project, never negotiated a contract. The employee stock ownership program ensures that people who've dedicated their careers to this company have a voice in its future." "What about family legacy? The Henderson name has been associated with construction in this area for 40 years. I stood up, walking to the window that overlooked our equipment yard. Bulldozers, excavators, and dump trucks sat in neat rows, ready for the next day's work. Each piece of equipment represented jobs completed, families housed, communities built. "The Henderson legacy isn't a name," I said. "It's a commitment to excellence. My husband and I built this company on the principle that construction is about more than profit. It's about creating lasting value for communities and meaningful work for employees. Anyone who shares that commitment can carry on the Henderson legacy, regardless of their DNA." The article ran Thursday morning with a headline, "Construction CEO Defends Mental Capacity Amid Family Legal Battle." It was fair, balanced, and quoted several industry leaders who praised my leadership and questioned the motives behind the lawsuit. But the damage was spreading. I started getting calls from clients, suppliers, and subcontractors, all expressing concern about the situation at Henderson and Associates. Some were subtle, asking about continuity of leadership. Others were direct, wondering if they should start looking for alternative contractors. Zachary and Felicity weren't just trying to take my company. They were trying to destroy its reputation, to force me into submission. That's when I decided to accelerate my timeline. Friday afternoon I called another all-staff meeting. This time I'd prepared visual aids. "As you all know, there's been some media attention regarding Henderson and Associates," I began, watching faces around the conference room. "I want to address this directly and share some information that might interest you." I clicked to the first slide of my presentation, a financial summary showing company performance over the past 5 years. Since 2020, Henderson and Associates has grown revenue by 38%. We've expanded our client base, improved our profit margins, and maintained the highest safety standards in the industry. This growth occurred while I served as operational head of the company. Click. Next slide. A comparison chart showing our performance against competitors. We consistently outperform larger firms in client satisfaction, project completion times, and employee retention. We're not just successful, we're industry leaders. Tom Martinez raised his hand. "Mrs. Henderson, the news report suggests that there are concerns about leadership stability. The only people expressing concerns are individuals who've never contributed to our success," I replied. Which brings me to my next point. Blick. A slide showing Zachary's employment history. Zachary Henderson worked for this company for exactly 24 months, from 2018 to 2020. He managed client accounts, work that was supervised, reviewed, and frequently corrected by senior staff. He left to pursue other opportunities and has no current involvement in construction or related industries. Blick. Felicity's history. Felicity Henderson completed a summer internship here in 2015. She chose to pursue marketing rather than construction and has no professional experience in our industry. The room was silent. I could see people processing this information, realizing that the family members trying to take control of their workplace were essentially outsiders. Now, I said, let me show you what I've been working on since Wednesday. Blick. A new slide. Henderson and Associates Employee Ownership Transition Plan. Effective January 1st, Henderson and Associates will begin transitioning to full employee ownership. Current employees will have the opportunity to purchase equity stakes based on tenure, performance, and contribution to company success. Within 5 years, Henderson and Associates will be 100% employee-owned and controlled. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Tom Martinez started clapping. Jennifer wiped tears from her eyes. Several field supervisors were grinning and shaking hands. But I wasn't finished. Additionally, I'm announcing the creation of the Christopher Henderson Excellence Fund, a $3 million endowment that will provide college scholarships for employees' children and professional development opportunities for staff members seeking to advance their careers. The applause was sustained this time, but I raised my hand for quiet. Finally, I want you to know that I've received preliminary interest from several industry publications about documenting our transition to employee ownership. This will be the largest employee stock ownership program in regional construction history, and it's generating significant positive attention for Henderson and Associates. As the meeting ended and people filed out, energized, excited, talking animatedly about the future, I remained in the conference room with my laptop, preparing the final elements of my strategy. Because what my children still didn't understand was that their lawsuit had given me exactly the platform I needed. Every news story about their competency challenge had also highlighted Henderson and Associates' success under my leadership. Every question about my judgment had been answered with concrete performance data. They tried to paint me as an unstable widow clinging to a business she couldn't handle. Instead, they'd positioned me as an innovative leader, pioneering worker ownership in a traditionally hierarchical industry. But more importantly, they'd forced me to accelerate plans that Christopher and I had discussed but never implemented. The employee ownership program wasn't just a defensive move. It was the culmination of decades of believing that the people who built the company should have a stake in its success. My phone buzzed with a text from Penelope. Judge scheduled preliminary hearing for Monday. They're requesting expedited evaluation due to ongoing business disruption. Are you ready? I typed back. More than ready. Because Monday's hearing wouldn't just be about my mental competency. It would be about whether two people who'd contributed nothing to Henderson and Associates could override the decisions of someone who'd spent 30 years building it into an industry leader. It would be about whether family relationships trumped business competence. It would be about whether my children's sense of entitlement could overcome 30 years of documented success, loyal employees, satisfied clients, and a bulletproof legal structure designed to protect exactly what they were trying to destroy. I closed my laptop and walked to the window, looking out at the equipment yard one more time. Tomorrow was Saturday. I'd spend it reviewing financial records, preparing testimony, and making sure every detail of my defense was flawless. But tonight, for the first time since Christopher's funeral, I was going to open a bottle of wine and toast the future of Henderson and Associates construction. A future that belonged to the people who'd earned it, not the people who'd merely inherited the name. My children had no idea what they'd unleashed. But they were about to find out exactly what happened when you declared war on someone who'd spent decades learning how to fight. The courthouse steps were crawling with reporters when I arrived Monday morning. Word had spread that the Henderson and Associates case involved millions of dollars, family betrayal, and questions about whether grief could disqualify someone from running their own business. Local news stations had picked up the story, framing it as a David and Goliath battle between corporate greed and family loyalty. They had no idea which side was which. I walked through the crowd wearing my best navy suit, the one Christopher had always said made me look like I could conquer Wall Street. Penelope met me at the courthouse doors, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression grimly satisfied. "Audrey, they're panicking," she said as we climbed the steps. "Zachary's attorney called this morning asking if we'd consider mediation. After they publicly questioned my mental capacity. After they told reporters I was too unstable to run my own company." I shook my head. "There's no negotiating with people who tried to destroy my reputation to steal my business." "Good," Penelope said, "because Judge Morrison has some interesting questions about their filing." Courtroom 3B was packed. Besides the immediate family and legal teams, I spotted several Henderson and Associates employees who'd taken time off work to attend, industry colleagues, and what appeared to be business school students studying the case. In the back row sat Patricia Valdez and two other contractors who'd known Christopher for decades. Zachary and Felicity sat with their attorney at the plaintiff's table, both dressed as if attending a board meeting rather than trying to have their mother declared incompetent. Zachary wore an expensive suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Felicity had chosen a conservative dress that screamed, "responsible adult daughter." Both of them looked confident, prepared. They were about to learn that preparation and overconfidence were very different things. Judge Morrison, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and sharp eyes, reviewed the files before looking up at the courtroom. "This is a preliminary hearing regarding a petition for mental competency evaluation and emergency conservatorship. I've reviewed the filings, and I have several questions before we proceed." She turned to Zachary and Felicity's attorney, a slick-looking man named Davidson, who specialized in family law and estate disputes. "Mr. Davidson, your clients allege that Mrs. Henderson is suffering from grief-induced psychological distress that renders her incapable of making sound business decisions. Can you point to specific business decisions that support this claim?" Davidson stood, consulting his notes. "Your Honor, Mrs. Henderson has engaged in erratic behavior since her husband's death. She's been hostile toward family members, made unilateral decisions about company restructuring, and implemented an employee stock ownership program without consulting other stakeholders." "Other stakeholders?" Judge Morrison repeated. "Who exactly are these other stakeholders?" "Her children, Your Honor. As heirs to their father's portion of the business, they have legitimate concerns about." "Mr. Davidson," the judge interrupted, "have you reviewed the corporate charter and succession documents filed by Henderson and Associates?" Davidson's confident expression flickered. "We're challenging the validity of those documents, Your Honor. They were created while Mr. Henderson was ill and may not reflect his true intentions." Judge Morrison turned to Penelope. "Ms. Hartman, when were these documents created and witnessed?" Penelope stood, her voice clear and authoritative. "Your Honor, the corporate restructuring was completed in March 2023, 18 months before Mr. Henderson's death. All documents were reviewed by 3 separate attorneys, notarized, and filed with appropriate state agencies. Mr. Henderson was in excellent health at the time, as confirmed by medical records we are prepared to submit. The succession clause that grants Mrs. Henderson full operational control has been part of the corporate charter since 2015. It was updated and reinforced in 2023, but the basic structure has been in place for nearly a decade." Judge Morrison made notes, then looked directly at Zachary and Felicity. "Mr. Henderson, Ms. Henderson, please stand." They rose, suddenly looking less confident. "You filed a petition claiming your mother is mentally incompetent to run her own business. Can either of you tell me your qualifications for evaluating business competence in the construction industry?" Zachary's face reddened. "Your Honor, we're her children. We're concerned about her well-being and the preservation of our father's legacy." "That wasn't my question. What are your professional qualifications?" Felicity stepped forward. "Your Honor, we both have college degrees and professional experience in construction." "No, Your Honor. but in business management. Not specifically in any field related to evaluating corporate leadership or mental competency. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Judge Morrison turned back to the paperwork. Ms. Hartman, I understand you have evidence regarding Henderson and Associates' performance under Mrs. Henderson's leadership? Yes, Your Honor. Penelope approached the bench with a thick folder. Financial statements, client testimonials, industry awards, safety records, and employee satisfaction surveys covering the 5 years since I assumed operational control. As the judge reviewed the documents, I watched my children's faces. The confidence was gone, replaced by growing panic as they realized their carefully constructed narrative was crumbling. Judge Morrison looked up. These numbers show consistent growth, exceptional performance metrics, and industry-leading client satisfaction. Mr. Davidson, how do you reconcile your client's claims of impaired judgment with this evidence of business success? Davidson was sweating now. Your Honor, recent decisions suggest emotional instability, such as the Employee Stock Ownership Program. It was implemented without family consultation. Family consultation isn't required for business decisions made by the majority owner, Judge Morrison said dryly. Anything else? She's been hostile toward her children's attempts to help with the business. Help with a business they've never worked in. The judge's tone was getting sharper. Mr. Davidson, I'm not seeing evidence of mental incompetence. I'm seeing evidence of 2 adult children who want control of a successful business they didn't build and aren't qualified to run. She set down the papers and fixed Zachary and Felicity with a stare that could have frozen steel. Furthermore, I'm troubled by evidence that suggests this petition may have been filed in bad faith. Penelope stepped forward again. Your Honor, we have documentation showing that the petitioners contacted multiple potential buyers for Henderson and Associates before filing this suit, misrepresenting both Mrs. Henderson's mental state and the company's financial condition. They were shopping the business, she continued, while simultaneously claiming their mother was incompetent to run it. Yes, Your Honor. We have recorded phone calls, email correspondence, and statements from potential buyers who were told that Mrs. Henderson was overwhelmed by grief and unable to handle operational demands. Judge Morrison's expression grew thunderous. Mr. Davidson, did your clients attempt to sell Henderson and Associates while filing a petition claiming the owner was mentally incompetent? The lawyer's composure finally cracked completely. Your Honor, my clients were exploring options for preserving their father's legacy by committing what appears to be fraud. Judge Morrison's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. They told potential buyers that Mrs. Henderson was mentally incapable of running the business while simultaneously filing legal documents claiming the same thing. That's not preserving a legacy. That's orchestrating a hostile takeover. I felt a cold satisfaction settle in my chest. Every piece of Christopher's careful planning, every document we'd prepared, every safeguard we'd built was working exactly as intended. Judge Morrison stood, and the entire courtroom rose with her. This petition is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I'm referring this matter to the district attorney's office for investigation of potential fraud charges. The gavel came down with a finality that echoed through the silent courtroom. Zachary and Felicity sat frozen, their faces white with shock. Their attorney was already packing his briefcase, probably calculating how quickly he could distance himself from clients who'd just been accused of fraud in open court. But I wasn't finished. As people began filing out of the courtroom, I stood and addressed my children directly, for the first time since this nightmare began. Zachary, Felicity. My voice carried across the now quiet room. You wanted to preserve your father's legacy. His legacy was integrity, honor, treating people with respect and dignity. You've just spent 3 weeks lying about my mental health, attempting to defraud potential buyers, and trying to steal a business you never earned. I walked toward their table, each step measured and deliberate. You thought grief made me weak. You thought love made me vulnerable. You were wrong about everything. Felicity's voice cracked. Mom, we just wanted. You wanted something that was never yours to take. I placed Christopher's final document on the table between us, one I'd been saving for this exact moment. Your father's will included a specific provision regarding inheritance. If either of you ever took legal action against me or the company, you forfeit any claim to his estate. Completely. Permanently. Zachary grabbed the document, his hands shaking as he read. This can't be legal. It's perfectly legal. Your father was a thorough man. I turned to leave, then paused. You're both fired from Henderson and Associates. Effective immediately. Security will escort you from any company property. Your corporate credit cards are cancelled. Your health insurance through the company ends today. I walked toward the courtroom exit, past the reporters already typing frantically on their phones, past the employees who were smiling and applauding, past the industry colleagues who were shaking their heads in amazement. At the door I turned back one final time. You want to know what grief really does? Strips away illusions. It shows you who people really are when they think you're vulnerable. Thank you for that lesson. It was expensive for you, but invaluable for me. The courthouse steps were chaos. Reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing, industry colleagues offering congratulations, but I felt strangely calm as Penelope and I walked to our car. Audrey, she said as we drove away, that was the most thorough demolition I've seen in 30 years of practice. I looked back at the courthouse, where my children were probably still sitting in shock, trying to comprehend how completely they'd destroyed their own lives. They declared war on someone who spent 40 years learning how to fight, I said. They got exactly what they deserved. 6 months later, I'm sitting in my new office in Denver, watching the news report about Henderson and Associates Construction, now 100% employee-owned and more successful than ever. The company they tried to steal has become a model for worker ownership in the construction industry. Zachary and Felicity. Last I heard, Zachary's startup failed, and he's working in sales. Felicity's marketing firm let her go when clients started asking about her family situation. They've both tried to contact me, of course. Apologies. Explanations. Pleas for forgiveness. I delete them all without reading. Some people think that makes me cold. They're wrong. Makes me wise. Because the most important lesson I learned from Christopher's death wasn't about grief or loss. It was about the difference between family and loyalty, between blood and character, between what people deserve and what they think they're entitled to. My children wanted my forgiveness. They should have thought about that before they tried to destroy me. In the end, I didn't just protect my company. I redefined its future. Henderson and Associates now stands stronger than ever. Not because of inheritance or entitlement, but because of commitment, loyalty, and hard-earned trust. My children may have tried to break me, but all they did was remind me of the power I've built through decades of resilience. This wasn't just a victory. It was a rebirth. If you believe in standing up for what you've built, in fighting back when you're underestimated, and in choosing loyalty over blood, subscribe for more real-life stories of strength, justice, and redemption. Your voice, your power, your story, it matters.